Remember that big space station the Emperor was building? Well, after 19 years, it's finally done. But guess what? The Rebel Alliance managed to steal some blueprints for it so they can figure out how to blow it up. The Empire isn't too happy about the stolen plans, so they send a huge Star Destroyer to chase down the Rebel ship. Instead of just blowing it up right away, which would be a quick end to this story, they decide to board the ship and get the plans themselves. Leia, being smart, hides the plans inside R2-D2 and sends a message with him. Then Darth Vader shows up and starts questioning the crew. When one guy doesn't tell him where the plans are, Vader kills him. Not the best way to get answers, but that's Vader for you. He tells his stormtroopers to capture everyone alive. Meanwhile, R2-D2 and his friend C-3PO escape in a pod. The Empire doesn't shoot it down because it has no life signs, so they think it's empty. Leia gets captured and brought to Vader, but neither he nor the Emperor realize she's his daughter. You'd think they'd notice, but no. Leia's brave, though. She says, "The Senate won't stand for this. You can't attack a diplomatic mission." But Vader doesn't care. He's like, "Sure, keep talking," and they still can't find the plans on her ship. They figure the plans must be with the escape pod, so someone will have to go to Tatooine to get them. Vader's like, "Not me, I hate sand. It's rough, it's coarse, and it gets everywhere." So R2-D2 and C-3PO end up going their separate ways when they crash land on Tatooine. Unfortunately, both droids get grabbed by Jawas, who are like tiny scavengers collecting junk. The Jawas plan to sell R2-D2 and C-3PO to Luke and his Uncle Owen. Funny thing is, Uncle Owen doesn't even recognize C-3PO, even though they've met before. Guess droids just aren't that memorable? Anyway, Luke ends up cleaning them up. While washing R2, he finds a message from a mysterious lady who's in trouble and asking for help. Luke doesn't know it's his sister, but he thinks she's cute and decides to help her. Gross, right? R2-D2 tricks Luke into removing his restraining bolt by promising to show him the rest of the message. Luke is excited, but gets interrupted by his aunt and uncle, just as he's about to get started. Classic teen moment. Later, Luke tells Uncle Owen that he thinks R2 belongs to an old guy named Ben Kenobi. Obi-Wan didn't bother changing his name when he went into hiding, so Luke figures it's him. Uncle Owen, not a fan of old Jedi, tells Luke to stay away from Ben. He also says Luke can't take that pilot job he wanted and will stay on the farm for another year. Aunt Beru is a bit more supportive, saying Luke is just like his father, but Owen seems worried, remembering how that turned out. Feeling down, Luke goes to find R2, who has already left on a mission to find Obi-Wan. Luckily, R2 can't fly, so Luke and C-3PO catch up with him the next morning. They're attacked by the Sand People. Luke gets knocked out, and while everyone is fighting, Obi-Wan shows up. He makes a weird noise that scares the Sand People away. Luke wakes up to find Obi-Wan there, even though Obi-Wan doesn't recognize R2-D2, who has helped him a lot before. Maybe he just thinks all droids look alike? They get C-3PO, who's having a breakdown saying, "Just leave me here, I'm done for." And Obi-Wan finally starts talking about the Jedi. Obi-Wan tells Luke that he used to fight with Luke's dad, which should be a huge deal for Luke, but he doesn't react. Probably because Tatooine is so isolated that they don't talk about the Jedi here, and Owen and Beru aren't exactly sharing the family history. Obi-Wan decides to give Luke his dad's old lightsaber and says, "Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough." Obi-Wan also casually mentions that Darth Vader killed Anakin, but he doesn't say that Anakin is actually Vader and went full dark side, murdering Jedi kids. He doesn't mention that Luke needs to learn this to help his sister. Probably didn't want to scare Luke with, "Oh yeah, your twin sister might also be on your dad's hit list." Luke wants to go with Obi-Wan, but is worried that Uncle Owen might get mad. Obi-Wan, being chill, just offers him a ride, like he's picking up a hitchhiker. Except, this ride comes with a lightsaber and destiny. Meanwhile, on the Death Star, the Emperor is fed up with the Senate complaining about blowing up diplomats. His solution? Fire them all. I am the Senate. So now it's just military people showing off their shiny new space station. They're excited about how scary the Death Star is, until one guy mocks Vader for not finding the rebel plans or the hidden base. Bad move. Vader's like, "You're underestimating the power of the Force," and uses a little Force choke on the guy for being disrespectful. Tough crowd. Back with Luke and Obi-Wan, they find a Jawa convoy that's been attacked. Luke realizes the Empire must have found out who bought the droids and is heading straight for his family. Instead of sticking with Obi-Wan, Luke decides to go alone to save Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. Good plan, kid. When Luke gets back to his home, it's a disaster. The house is burning, and Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen are gone, cooked by the stormtroopers. He heads back to Obi-Wan where he sees R2 and 3PO with the Jawas and decides, "Alright, I'm in. I've got nothing left to lose." They go to Mos Eisley to find a ship. The place is full of stormtroopers, but Obi-Wan uses his Jedi mind trick like it's nothing. He says, "These aren't the droids you're looking for. and the stormtroopers, not the sharpest tools in the shed, let them go. They go to a cantina where droids aren't allowed. Inside, Luke gets into trouble with some shady guys. Obi-Wan has to step in. He pulls out his lightsaber and cuts off a guy's arm. Luke thinks Obi-Wan is the coolest ever. They meet Han Solo, a pilot with money issues, and his furry co-pilot, Chewbacca. Before they can even talk about a ride, a bounty hunter named Greedo shows up. Greedo warns Han with McClunky, which means, "I'm about to shoot you." Han shoots first and walks away. They hurry to Han's ship, the Millennium Falcon. Just as they're about to take off, a rat-like creature tells the Empire where they are. Now they're being chased, but Luke still finds time to annoy Han. Meanwhile, on the Death Star, Leia is having a terrible day. She's taken to Tarkin, who looks ancient, so let's call him Grandma Tarkin, and insults him. Tarkin doesn't like that and threatens to blow up her home planet, Alderaan, unless she tells him where the rebel base is. Leia gives him a location, but Tarkin decides to blow up Alderaan anyway. He wants to show off his new toy. Alderaan goes boom, and Leia gets a crash course in aggressive negotiations. Back on the Millennium Falcon, Luke's trying out his new lightsaber and getting blasted by a training droid. Obi-Wan says, "Use the Force, Luke," and hands him a helmet that blocks his vision. They arrive at where Alderaan should be, but surprise, it's vanished. Before they can even react, they get pulled into the Death Star's tractor beam. Vader shows up with his spooky Sith vibes and senses Obi-Wan's presence. The crew hides in some smuggling compartments, then sneaks out, grabbing stormtrooper outfits to blend in. Classic disguise move. Obi-Wan goes off on his own mission to disable the tractor beam, leaving the others to be bored. R2-D2, being his nosy self, finds out that Leia is on the station and scheduled for execution. Luke, all hormonal and determined, wants to rescue her. Han's not interested until Luke mentions Leia is rich. Never mind that her entire planet just exploded. Details, right? Their plan? Pretend Chewbacca's a prisoner. Because nothing says subtle like dragging a giant Wookiee into a detention center. They storm in, blast the guards, and destroy the cameras. Luke finally reaches Leia's cell, and the first thing Leia says is, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Maybe don't sass the guy rescuing you, Leia." The stormtroopers are closing in, so they jump into a garbage chute. Brilliant move, until they find themselves in trash water with an octopus-like creature that thinks Luke might be a tasty snack. Of course, Luke shows up again, because plot armor. Now they're stuck in a trash compactor with walls closing in. They try to reach 3PO on the radio, but he turned it off. So they're floating in this trash heap like it's a Star Wars escape room. Somehow, none of the crew gets flattened by the trash compactor's debris. Seems like only the walls are allowed to squish things. Luckily, R2-D2 saves the day by shutting off the compactor just before they all get turned into space pancakes. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan is sneaky beaky and manages to disable the tractor beam without making a sound. As they try to get back to the Falcon, stormtroopers are waiting, so Han decides to chase them down the hallway, because running headlong into danger is always a great plan. Surprise, it's a trap. Han and Chewie barely escape by closing the blast doors just in time. Back to Obi-Wan, who turns a corner and bumps into Vader, who's been waiting for this moment. Vader's all like, "My powers have doubled since last time we met," while Obi-Wan's thinking, "Didn't you get burned last time we met?" Vader's still clinging to his "I'm the master now" attitude. Their duel? More like two grandpas waving their canes around. It's nothing compared to their fiery duel on Mustafar. This is more like watching two kids swat at each other with Christmas wrapping paper tubes. Yawn. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew is trying to sneak onto the Falcon, but there are stormtroopers guarding it. These troopers, however, are more interested in watching Vader and Obi-Wan's slow-motion fight than doing their actual job. Thanks to their distraction, our heroes sneak aboard the ship with some ninja moves. Just when everything seems to be going smoothly, Obi-Wan lets Vader strike him down. The stormtroopers, finally snapping back to reality, start shooting at them. Obi-Wan vanishes in a poof of Jedi ghostness, casually telling Luke to run while Luke's just standing there getting shot at. Not the best survival instinct, Luke. They finally manage to take off in the Falcon, and Leia, who just watched her entire planet get blown up, tries to comfort Luke, who's sobbing over a guy he barely knew. Meanwhile, Han gets back to business, announcing they've got company. Han's like, "If this chase goes on any longer, we're all gonna end up as crispy critters." But Vader's got his own plans, and it turns out they're being tracked. Leia, ever the strategist, figures this out and says, "They're tracking us. But hey, let's head to the secret rebel base anyway. What's the worst that could happen?" She's got the Death Star plans and is banking on finding a weak spot. Let's hope she's right, or this rebellion's gonna be over before it starts. The rebels reach their base on the moon, but guess who shows up? The Death Star, looming on the other side of the planet. Instead of just blowing up Yavin and causing chaos, they orbit the moon, giving the rebels a chance to discover a weak spot in its exhaust port. Everyone's like, that's impossible, but Luke's all, it's just like when I used to hunt frogs back home. The meeting wraps up, and Luke finds Han packing up to leave. Han wants to pay off Jabba the Hutt, the gangster who runs the pod races. Luke calls him a selfish jerk, and Han's like, I just want to stay alive. Luke then tells Leia that Han's leaving, and Leia's all, okay? Luke's a bit hurt, thinking they were best buds, and starts missing Obi-Wan. He's like, I wish Ben were here. Leia kisses him to shut him up. Luke bumps into an old buddy, who questions if he's up for the suicide mission. Luke's like, of course I am. They try to give him another droid, but he's attached to R2-D2 and claims he's his new best friend. They head to the Death Star in their X-Wings, but the approach is a nightmare. They have to navigate a tight trench and dodge turbo lasers. TIE fighters come out to play, and lots of them are getting blown up. One poor pilot's last words are his friends calling him Fat Hawkins. It's all very chaotic. Seeing the mess, Vader decides to jump in and help. The Gold team starts their trench run, but Vader's hot on their tail, saying, this is where the fun begins. He takes out one pilot, and another is like, let's get out of here. But Gold Leader is all, too bad you're on a suicide mission. Move right so I can get a clear shot. And then Vader takes out the Gold Leader. Now it's Red Team's turn in the spotlight. Red Leader gets knocked out, and his wingmen drop like flies. One of them's like, I got him, but misses and gets turned into space confetti. Luke's up next, but his stabilizer's on the fritz. R2's working his circuits off to fix it, but Obi-Wan's ghost shows up like, forget the computer, just use the Force. Luke's like, sure, let's ditch the targeting system and go full Jedi mode. Meanwhile, the Rebel base is having a collective meltdown, thinking, we're all gonna die, and you're turning off the one thing that might save us? Seriously. To make things worse, Vader's hot on Luke's tail, close enough to give R2 a laser facial. The Death Star is gearing up to blow the Rebel base to smithereens, and Vader's all set to finish Luke with a dramatic, this is the end for you. But then, bam, Han Solo swoops in out of nowhere. With some seriously lucky flying, he hits a 7-10 split, taking out Vader's wingman and sending him spinning into space. Guess he's gonna need another tow truck to get him back. Luke takes his shot, and surprise, the space torpedoes are now homing missiles. They make a sharp turn and hit the Death Star's exhaust port right on target. Boom. The Death Star explodes just before it can fire on the Rebel base. Talk about cutting it close. Leia decides to reward Luke and Han for their bravery with shiny medals. Chewbacca's there too, but of course no medal for the Wookiee, classic disrespect. Episode 4 ends on a high note, but don't get too comfy because it's time for Episode 5. So the Rebels blew up the Death Star. Yay. But guess what? The Empire still knows where their base is, so they have to pack up and head out. Their new home? Hoth. It's a frozen wasteland where it's cold 24/7. Darth Vader is seriously miffed about losing his giant space toy, aka the Death Star, and guess who he's got in his crosshairs? That's right, Luke. Meanwhile, Luke and Han are out cruising the frozen wasteland on their horned llamas when they spot a probe from a Star Destroyer and starts heading back to base. Luke, however, decides to play hero and gets ambushed by an abominable snowman. Back at base, Han's got some bad news. Jabba the Hutt is still after him for that debt. Jabba's patience is shorter than a Wookiee's temper, so Han figures it's better to handle it himself before the bounty hunters start showing up. He tells Leia he's bouncing, and she responds with a casual, cool, have a safe trip. Just as Han's about to leave, C-3PO informs him that Luke hasn't come back yet. Han heads to the gate, but the officer warns him the temperature is dropping fast. Han, being the reckless space cowboy he is, just shrugs and says, well, looks like 2 of us might freeze to death then, and rides off into the icy night to find Luke. Meanwhile, in the Wampa's cave, Luke's hanging upside down like a slab of space meat. But hey, the Wampa left his lightsaber conveniently close by. Using the Force, Luke manages to pull the lightsaber to him. Guess sometimes you can just wing it and hope for the best. Forget Yoda's do or do not mantra. Luke's proving that sometimes just trying is enough. Luke cuts himself down, luckily not impaling himself with the lightsaber, and just as the Wampa comes over for a snack, Luke slices off its arm and bolts into the freezing wasteland. Instead of staying in the relatively warmer cave, he's like, nah, I'll just go freeze to death outside. He stumbles through the snow and eventually passes out because, duh, it's freezing. But wait. Plot twist. Obi-Wan's ghost shows up with a casual, hello there, and tells Luke to go find Yoda on Dagobah. Meanwhile, Han is out on his Tauntaun, which decides it's had enough of the cold and keels over. Han's like, well, I read this survival guide somewhere, and slices open the Tauntaun, stuffing Luke inside like it's a fleshy sleeping bag. Back at the base, the rebels assume Han and Luke are goners and shut the doors like, oh well, we're staying warm. The next morning, the rebels head out to look for their frozen friends, but find them alive and snuggled up in their Tauntaun sleeping bag. Anyway, Han can't leave yet because the shields are down. Han, of course, assumes Leia is just using this as an excuse to keep him around. She's totally got a crush on me, he muses. Leia decides to mess with Han and kisses Luke, which makes Han fume in the corner. Suddenly, they pick up a signal and C-3PO's like, oh hey, that's an Imperial code. Han checks it out and ends up shooting the probe droid, which of course alerts the Empire that something's up on Hoth. Smooth move, Han. Back on the Imperial side, there's an officer who's sure the rebels are on Hoth. His boss is like, nah, you're just paranoid. But Vader, ever the mood killer, chimes in with, Skywalker is definitely there. How he knows Luke's name? No one's quite sure, just Vader things. The boss looks at the officer like, great, now you've gotten me killed. Back at the rebel base, Han and Chewie are still struggling to fix the Millennium Falcon, while Luke is gearing up to head to Dagobah, thanks to Obi-Wan's ghostly advice, or maybe just from freezing his brain. The Imperials show up way too close to Hoth, and the rebels are like, great, just what we needed. They could have made a clean getaway if they'd evacuated earlier, but Han had to shoot a probe droid. Now it's full-on chaos. The rebels are forced into a ground assault as Vader gets super cranky and force chokes his admiral through the TV. The Empire's rolling out these giant metal dogs, AT-ATs, and the rebels are scrambling to fend them off. With blasters proving useless against their thick armor, they get creative and start tripping them up with tow cables. Once the AT-ATs hit the ground, their armor is suddenly as flimsy as paper, and the rebels can finally shoot them down. The rebel base is falling apart faster than a cookie in hot tea, and Han has to rush to get Leia onto the Falcon. Vader shows up, fashionably late as always, and just misses them as they make their escape. Conveniently, the rebels also relocated Luke's X-Wing, with R2-D2 strapped in like a loyal Uber driver. Luke's heading to Dagobah without a hitch because apparently all of Vader's ships decided to tail the Falcon instead. Their hyperdrive's busted, so they're stuck at sublight speed with a squad of TIE fighters hot on their tail. So what's their brilliant plan? Fly straight into an asteroid field, because that's totally rational, right? Of course, someone brings up how dangerous this is. Cue the odds. The chance of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1. But in real life, the asteroids would be spaced out miles apart, so this whole scene is way more intense in the movies. Han's like, never tell me the odds, and heads straight for the most reckless path possible. They find a big asteroid with a conveniently placed hole and decide to hide out there. Meanwhile, Luke crash lands on Dagobah, and immediately gets his X-Wing stuck in the swamp. And what's his next move? He tries to shoot Yoda when he first shows up. To be fair, Luke doesn't know it's Yoda, so Yoda decides to mess with him. He goes through Luke's stuff like a nosy roommate. Luke's already being a jerk, snapping, I don't want your help, I just want my lamp back. Yoda, being the troll he is, takes a bite out of Luke's dinner. Luke's reaction? He throws it away like, gross, someone's already had a bite of this. Yoda, still playing his game, tells Luke he knows where to find the real Yoda and drags him back to his swampy little mud hut. Back in the asteroid cave, Han and Leia are getting cozy. But just as things start heating up, boom, 3PO barges in like the ultimate third wheel. Sorry, sweetheart, no time for romance when I'm around, poor Han. Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet is getting battered by asteroids, but does Vader care? Nope, as long as someone finds the Falcon. He orders the whole fleet into the asteroid field, but, plot twist, he has his ship fall back because he needs better cell reception to call the Emperor. Priorities. During their holo chat, Palpatine drops a bombshell. By the way, that Skywalker kid who blew up the Death Star? Yeah, he's your son. Vader's like, what? You're messing with me. Palps insists it's true, but Vader's already got his own secret plan brewing. The Emperor wants Luke dead, but Vader's thinking, I could totally turn this guy to the dark side. Back on Dagobah, R2's supposed to be keeping an eye on the camp, but like the nosy little droid he is, he sneaks off to follow Luke and Yoda. Meanwhile, Yoda's trying to teach Luke some patience, but Luke's having a full-blown toddler tantrum. No, I don't even know why I'm here. This is a waste of time. He's throwing the Jedi equivalent of a temper tantrum, which only proves Yoda's point. Then Yoda drops a bombshell. He was just pretending to be crazy as part of some twisted test. Yoda casually mentions he's been spying on Luke his whole life. Talk about a major privacy invasion. So Yoda makes Luke promise to stick around until his training is done. Luke's all, I swear, I got this. I won't fail you. Yeah, we'll see about that. Meanwhile, the Imperial fleet's getting desperate. They can't find the Falcon, so their bright idea is to start dropping bombs randomly on asteroids. Han and the gang hear some noise, and Leia's like, hey, go check that out. Turns out it's just a bunch of space bats, Minox, hanging out outside the ship. They then start to realize something's off, like the fact that they're in a giant space worm's mouth that's just chilling with its mouth wide open. You know, as one does. Back on Dagobah, Yoda's now riding Luke like a backpack, dishing out life lessons and telling him to stop asking so many questions. Typical. Then Yoda points Luke toward this creepy cave and tells him to leave his weapons behind. But what does Luke do? Takes his lightsaber anyway. So much for that Jedi discipline. Inside, he encounters Darth Vader, except it's not really Vader, and they have this bizarre slow-motion fight that ends with Luke chopping off Vader's head. But instead of a decapitated helmet, Luke sees his own face inside. It's like a bad dream, but also a huge hint he's totally missing. Meanwhile, Vader's busy hosting a job fair for bounty hunters, hiring a bunch to help track down the Falcon. The Imperial officers get lucky and spot Han and the gang, only to lose them again almost immediately. Nice job, guys. Better keep those bounty hunters on speed dial. Back on Dagobah, Luke's taking his training to the next level by trying to levitate rocks while doing a handstand. R2 starts freaking out because the X-Wing is sinking deeper into the swamp. Yoda's like, don't stress, just use the Force and lift it out. But Luke's attempts barely make a dent. Yoda, clearly done with Luke's whining, just casually lifts the X-Wing out like it's a feather. Meanwhile, Vader's back to his usual shtick, choking out officers who keep losing the Falcon. Turns out, Han and the crew have been hiding on top of the Star Destroyer this whole time. Their brilliant escape plan? Wait until the Empire dumps their space trash and then sneak out like, yeah, no one will notice us in the garbage. Smooth move, right? They're headed to Cloud City to meet Han's old buddy, Lando Calrissian, who's basically the galaxy's smoothest gambler and troublemaker. Leia's already rolling her eyes at the thought of meeting this guy. But guess who's lurking in the trash? Boba Fett. This guy's one step ahead, tracking them like the galaxy's sneakiest bounty hunter. Seriously, it's like he was parked right next to the garbage chute. Back on Dagobah, Luke's still balancing on his hands and trying to visualize his next move when he suddenly has a vision of Han and Leia in deep trouble. Luke's all fired up to rescue his friends, but Yoda's like, hold your horses. You promised to finish your training, and breaking promises doesn't help anyone. Leia's got this gut feeling they should bail on Cloud City, but Lando's like, nah, let's stick around. What's the worst that could happen? They land the Falcon, and Lando tries to act all cool with Han, only to hug him like a long-lost buddy. The guards, unimpressed, are like, alright, enough with the buddy-buddy act, let's get back to business. Turns out the Falcon used to belong to Lando, and he's pretty ticked that Han swiped it. Han's like, dude, you lost it fair and square. Meanwhile, 3PO finds what he thinks is R2 in a closet, only to get blown up. Back on Dagobah, Yoda and Obi-Wan are having a meltdown about Luke potentially turning to the dark side. They're all like, remember the cave. But honestly, Luke did pretty well against Vader. I mean, cutting off Vader's head is a solid win in my book. Meanwhile, Chewie's rummaging through the recycling center, fighting off little guys over parts. Lando, trying to prove Leia right, takes Han and Leia straight to Darth Vader. Vader's like, hey, want a drink? Han's response? I could really use a stiff one right about now. Because nothing says welcome to my lair like a casual drink offer. They throw Chewie into a cage and lock up 3PO, who's in pieces. Vader decides it's time to test the carbon freezing chamber on Han. You know, just to make sure it won't kill Luke. Leia, all emotional, tells Han she loves him and that he doesn't creep her out anymore. Han's classic reply? I know. Because Han Solo's idea of romance is basically saying, yeah, I'm awesome, I get it. When they pull Han out of the carbon freeze, his handcuffs have mysteriously vanished. Move telling Lando to take Leia and Chewie to the ship instead of sending his own troops. Lando's like, dude, they're supposed to be under my supervision. Vader's like, nah, I've got this. Luke shows up just in time to see Han being carted off and Leia and Chewie being kidnapped. Leia's like, it's a trap. And Luke's all, yeah, no kidding, I'm going anyway. Vader's got some fancy lighting effects going on, creating that dramatic, I'm the bad guy ambiance. He sees Luke and says, you're shorter than I expected. Instead of a straightforward surrender, they dive into a lightsaber duel. Vader's using his Apple Watch to call for backup, because why not? Lando's like, oops, sorry for the trap, but he makes a deal to save Leia and Chewie. Then Vader goes and changes the deal right in front of them. Classic Vader move. Leia's not thrilled and starts yelling at Lando, while Chewie's busy choking him. Meanwhile, Vader's in full sentimental villain mode, trying to bond with Luke. I wasn't always like this, you know? I used to be just like you. Luke's not impressed, especially after losing his lightsaber like it's a new dance move. Vader's like, let's have a heart-to-heart. But instead of a cozy chat, it's straight to the carbon chamber. Luke makes a dramatic escape, just in time. Vader starts throwing random objects at Luke, like it's a very intense game of dodgeball. Luke manages to break a window and get sucked out into the void. Vader's like, oh well, guess I'll just make him mad and turn him to the dark side. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang makes their escape on the Falcon. Vader's trying his hardest to sell the join me and rule the galaxy pitch, but Luke's not buying it. When Vader drops the bombshell, I'm your father, Luke's reaction is pure gold. I'm sorry, what now? Vader's like, join me and we'll overthrow the Emperor. Luke's response? Nope, not interested. Desperate, Luke takes a leap of faith, landing on an antenna. Vader's like, well, that's unexpected. They call it a diplomatic solution. Luke uses the Force to reach out to Leia, who senses he's in trouble and decides to rescue him. Lando's stunned she was right, and Leia's like, yeah, I've got the Force too. It's not just for Jedi. They get Luke aboard the Falcon, but the ship's still under attack. They try to jump to light speed, but oops, the hyperdrive is still down. R2, who's been busy trying to fix C-3PO, finally realizes the gravity of the situation and switches to hyperdrive repairs. And with that, episode 5 wraps up. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe.